Welcome to the Shun podcast, where we expose religions that use shunning as a tool to control people. Before we get into today's story, let's go ahead and take care of a little business. First, I'd like to thank those of you that take the time to leave reviews for both Shunned and my original podcast, This JW Life. A lot of people leave reviews on iTunes, and it really helps the podcast to get found so that more people can find the help they need. Second, I'd like to go ahead and thank Lynette for signing up to support what I do on patreon.com. Her $10 donation will get one of our Shun pandas sent her way so she can have her own slice of panda paradise that we were promised growing up as Jehovah's Witnesses. If you'd like to support my work, which goes far beyond this podcast, you can do so at patreon.com/shunned. You can even get a panda for yourself or join in our monthly online meetup. I appreciate the support more than you know. Honestly, right now the donations really help as I've had to take a step back from my cleaning business due to a back issue, and I'm not really sure when or if I'll be able to go back. So any and all support helps. I also want to put out a call for anyone interested in getting some personal coaching. My hope is that this new circumstance in my life gives me the time to really help people on a deeper level and helps me to build out my coaching practice farther. So I actually offer personal one-on-one coaching. It can be cult related, but it doesn't have to be. Anything in life where you feel stuck or just want to improve or bounce ideas around is something that we can work on together. It can be personal, business related, relationship related, whatever it is. You know me from this podcast. You know that I love to talk and help people through these things. So if you'd like to engage in personal coaching, if you have a friend or family member that would be interested, please send them my way. I'd love to help. Go to shunpodcast.com/coaching. Or you can contact me. You can just email me. It's shunpodcast@gmail.com, and let's talk. And some of you know that for a while I've actually offered a group coaching course, but it's not always easy to find a group. It's not easy to get people on board at the same time. People kind of come as they come. So what I'm doing is I'm taking that group coaching course. I've turned it into an individual coaching course. So for just $99, I'm offering a 4-week course that will help you to really get grounded by processing your past, finding yourself in the present, and looking forward to the future that actually fits you. To do something individually, one-on-one like this at this price is kind of unheard of. So reach out if you'd like to take a first step towards something better. You're actually going to hear my guest today is a professional coach herself, and she actually mentions the course in her interview. So I've also got some more cool things going on. There's an amazing experience that somebody in the Facebook group had that is guaranteed to make you light up and smile. You're dead inside if you can't smile at this one. So I'm going to share this after the interview. Also, my birthday is coming up very soon. I guess this might be the last podcast or almost last podcast before it. So this is the last chance if you want to take part in my birthday party, the things that I'm doing. I'll share that information after the episode. So today we're going to meet Linda. Linda was a devout Jehovah's Witness, one that believed it all and really put her heart and soul into it. Today she's been out of the organization for 25 years, and our discussion involves Buddhist teachings, the neuroscience of shunning, and her story, which she also shares in her memoir. You'll hear about that. It's entitled Shunned, How I Lost My Religion and Found Myself. So you're going to see how she both lost that religion and then what she found on the other side. So without further ado, let's go ahead and meet Linda.
Okay, so my name is Linda. I'm 56 years old. I was a Jehovah's Witness, and I'm shunned.
All right, Linda. So then how did you come to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the first place?
I was born into it.
Yes.
My mother was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and she was raised with the witnesses. She was a very devoted witness. She married my father, who was her high school sweetheart.
Oh, wow.
He was not a Jehovah's Witness, so she was a little bit of a rebel there herself.
Yeah.
But she was in love. My parents had a very long marriage until my mother passed away a couple years ago. So it was a interesting relationship they had, but definitely they loved each other. Yeah, but my father wasn't a witness, so I grew up in, as they say, a divided household. I always really loved my father, had a strong affinity for him and my mother, and he converted to the truth. It's kind of an interesting way to say it, but
Hmm.
he started studying when I was in my late 20s. And he was a long one. It took about 5 years from study to baptism, but he finally
Wow.
got there, which of course overjoyed everyone in our family, everyone in our community. And what's interesting about it is the day that he got baptized, that coincided with me and the doubts that came up in me. I was an adult. By this time I'm in my late 20s, early 30s. And I'm like, man, I'm having doubts. I think I might need to leave. And here my father's coming into the faith. He's
Wow.
getting baptized. Like the one person that might not shun me is now becoming part of that community. How is this going to work out? It was a really very, very complex and interesting time
Yeah,
for
that's
me.
heavy. That's heavy.
Yeah.
To have that dichotomy going on, both of those things at the same time. So now
Yeah.
you mentioned that your mom was a witness, and I assume her parents were. So how far did this go back?
I'm not sure, Michael. I know my grandparents on my mother's side, of course, were in the religion, and I don't really recall how they came to it. But
Gotcha.
I do recall, incredible stories of people getting in their cars and driving hundreds and hundreds and thousands of miles and camping on the roadside to attend conventions. So, you know, that's those are stories that are in our family, and yeah, so
So you
I
go. So
don't.
it goes way back. I mean,
Yeah,
that's several generations.
that's right.
Yeah, that's interesting. To be able to, I think the witnesses now they talk about their quote spiritual heritage,
Hmm.
and you have quite the spiritual heritage as far as the religion goes, going all the way back to your grandparents.
Hmm.
Um, so with that usually comes a certain measure of pressure to keep up or to
Hmm.
stay in.
Hmm.
Um, Now you grew up, at least as a kid, in what you said was a divided household. How did you see the world? Living kind of in two worlds. How did that impact you?
Well, I'm really grateful. So, bearing in mind that I've been out of the religion for 25 years, I've been shunned for 24 years, and I gave myself a year to just get some space from it.
Yeah.
These doubts come. I know you did that too. You just get some space. Like, I just need to get away from this and see what I see when I'm not exposed to it so consistently.
Hmm.
So, the things that I'm sharing with you today really come from like reflecting over 25 years what it's like to be out. And I know I've said this to you. One of the reasons I wanted to be on your podcast was just to say to people, it gets better. It gets easier, it gets better. Like there is a wonderful life on the other side of shunning, even as painful and heart-wrenching as it is.
Sure.
And I wrote a memoir that was just published last year called Shunned, How I Lost My Religion and Found Myself. And it's really the story of where my doubts came, how I grappled with those internally for months, probably 18 months, maybe even more than that. I was married to a Jehovah's Witness, so I could see that if I was having doubts about the religion and need to leave it, that would impact that. I ended up getting a divorce from my witness husband and leaving the religion. And thus started disappointed a lot of people. And
Sure.
in that process, I also talk about your question here of what was it like to grow up, in this quote unquote divided household. And um, yes, there was a lot of pressure to go to the meetings. We were very good, little soldiers.
Hmm.
Mom made sure we made it to all the meetings. I really have to admire my mother that she worked full time in an office and she got us kids, to all those meetings. and out in service every Saturday, like with rare exceptions. And my father and mother had made an agreement early on in their marriage when they started having kids that she would raise them in the truth. And that's what she wanted to do. And my father's reply was, that's fine, as long as, number one, he said, I don't want any of my kids selling religion on any street corner, which is hilarious because all these kids pioneered and did, street work and that sort of thing, and door
Sure.
to door work. All of us pioneered. And the other thing he said is when they get old enough to make up their mind, they should be allowed to make up their mind. And of course, all of us, I'm the youngest of three, we all grew up, pioneered. And of course, if your older siblings pioneer, that creates pressure and kind of an expectation on you that you'll pioneer. And I just kind of took that for granted that, oh, Armageddon's coming any day. I was proud that I wasn't necessarily going to university or whatever because I was going to go pioneer and maybe I'd be a missionary. Maybe I'd go to Gilead. I had all these, big aspirations, and it never occurred to me not to be doing any of those things. It was just so a given that it didn't even occur to me to question it. Thankfully, my father, he was a wonderful person, very hospitable to the community. We even hosted the book study in our home for several years, and my dad was amenable to that. But I think having a quote unquote worldly father helped me appreciate that, worldly people were normal, just normal people, and I didn't need to be afraid of them. So from a pretty early age, even though worldly people were like, oh, those worldly people, and we have to be careful, there was also just this other part of knowing that I could, communicate, converse, interact with worldly people, and it wasn't such a big deal as it was, I think, to some other people that I observed around me in the congregation.
Yeah, it seems like, at least anecdotally, in my experience, there are a lot of people, a lot more people who are out now of the religion, that were raised in families where they did get to see kind of both sides. Maybe it was a
Yeah.
divided household or whatever, and so worldly quote people weren't demonized quite as much. It's kind of hard to sometimes to demonize a person, especially when they live in your own household.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it really is. Now, did you get to celebrate holidays at all? Like, were you exposed to any of what you
No,
would see in normal culture?
no, 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 no.
No,
We were
gotcha.
we were unquestioning true believers, and I
Okay.
know that created, quite honestly, that did create strife in our family at times. My and I've become even more aware of that strife having left. And after I wrote my memoir, one of my uncles, who's my father's brother, who
Hmm.
is not a witness, so my father's side of the family was not witnesses, and he got in touch with me. He read my book. He said, "Oh my God, this answers so many questions that I've had," and he made me aware of the difficulties on. Of course, as a child, I wouldn't be so aware of this, but the difficulties that created for my father with his family because they lived nearby and he would go to their house on Christmas Eve or whatever, but without us. And that was difficult. And sometimes he wouldn't come. And I think my father would have loved to have been around his family, but there was really just hearing stories from my uncle. It was very clear that there was a lot going on there that I just, as a young girl, wasn't aware of.
Sure.
I remember keeping this. This makes me laugh. I remember one time. It's Halloween and we lived in a suburb, where the houses are fairly close together, a great a neighborhood for trick or treating. And I remember my mom, like, we're closing. Of course, it was a meeting night, we'd all take off and go to the meeting and like, oh, good, we don't have to be around for this. But I remember one year my mom saying, oh, we're going to turn off all the lights. We're going to keep the porch light off. We're going to keep the living room lights off. And people still came to our door and knocked, but we didn't answer it,
Hmm.
which as I look back now must have been weird to me, but you just accept what's going on. And another year I remember my father saying, this is, and he would swear this is total BS, but he wouldn't say BS, and they'd have a little interaction, and he he'd buy candy and he'd do the trick or treating. So definitely strife in the background. I have another memory of my grandmother on my father's side coming to our house, and for a birthday, my birthday, she gave me a card, and I was maybe 5 or 6, I don't recall. And inside it, she put a dollar bill. And of and I'm sitting there opening this card, and here's my mother, who's a staunch Jehovah's Witness and has a challenged relationship with her mother-in-law, my grandmother. And my grandmother, and here she is. I love my grandmother. And I was aware of the tension between these two women just intuitively. And here I get this card. It's acknowledging my birthday, which I know I'm not supposed to do. But oh my God, she's given me a dollar bill, which is all the money in the world,
Oh
So
yeah.
5 years old or whatever I was, and being so confused about what to do.
Yeah.
I was excited, but oh my God, I was thrilled. And that's about all I remember about that, like hugging my grandma and thanking her and then like running downstairs just to get away. And so definitely being in that environment, there's probably a lot of strife and uncommunicated expectations and pressures that I wasn't even aware of at the time, but that now I can look back on with a lot of compassion, really, and
Yes.
also anger. Like, really thinking about my grandma, and it's like, oh, I see what you were doing there, grandma. That wasn't very cool. And also my mother, and like these two women putting a 5-year-old in
Yes.
a very difficult spot, and having a lot of compassion for that 5-year-old, but also just rolling my eyes and going, good grief, people, it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be this hard.
Did you get to keep the dollar?
I did. And
Really?
yeah, oh yeah, got to keep the dollar.
Nice.
I think that was the outcome of a heated debate between my parents. And I don't recall what I spent it on, but I probably figured out how to spend it 10 different ways before I actually spent it.
Oh,
Who knows?
sure. Yeah. To be a kid again and be, to where a dollar was, such a big deal,
That's right.
the simple things. Um,
Mhm.
I can see it's really, you just see all the sad positions that everybody is put in that divided situation. I can see your dad going to the holidays or going to Christmas at his family's house and not having you guys with them. Like that
Mhm.
has to be the hardest thing to do.
Mhm.
And I'm sure he got a lot of uncomfortable questions, and yeah, that's really difficult. But then, on the other side, you kids were put in an uncomfortable position, and your mom, because she believed a certain way, was put in an uncomfortable position. Your mother, it's just like nobody can really be completely happy because everybody is playing a certain level of a game
Mhm.
between each other. And it's just a shame that this has to come in between all of these people that could have probably had better relationships if it wasn't for this one thing?
That's right. Yeah. And people start dreading certain times of the year
Yeah.
because of that. And, there are a lot of people, quite honestly, that dread Christmas anyway, that aren't
Yeah.
former Jehovah's Witnesses or ever
Yes.
been shunned. It's a loaded time of year anyway.
Hmm.
But yeah, it created a lot of unnecessary divisions. This is really what I see now, is the problem with the way I was raised and what I was taught, which I believed hook, line, and sinker. I mean, I was really an unquestioning true believer. I started going out in service, I think, when I was 3, and I knocked on my first door when I was 9. And, I really believed in it. Jehovah God was real to me. I mean, I say this in my memoir. I would look up and I would think, I'd picture him, and he'd kind of look a lot like my dad or my brother, like this being that was very vivid to me. And um, I, but I realize, and many good things came out of being raised that way. I can see the gifts of this way of being raised, and um, I could be happy to talk about that. But when I um, think about religion, this religion in general, and all religions. So Jehovah's Witnesses in particular, and many religions in general, and I can say all, but there's this way of creating separation. And separation is exactly the opposite of what we need in this world.
Hmm.
To look at other people, to face the problems that we face right now as a human family are enormous. And the only way we can solve those is if we start to understand how much we have in common and how much we have these basic needs in common. And yes, different ways of going about it. And it's not easy, to reconcile our differences, but to basically understand how our humanity and see the humanity in others. And the way I was raised, it was like there's the them and there's the us.
Absolutely.
And that I'm better. And I don't think anybody ever really said this outright to me, but I, of course, just the way that things are communicated, and I'm better than them, or we're better than them because we've got this thing called the truth, and we know, and we're certain. And be careful of that. Like, really, really be careful. Stay, it was, as you know, hammered into us, stay separate, stay separate. And once I left, it is terrifying for all of us, especially those spiritualists, like, oh my God, I'm now walking out into the world I was taught to fear. And I can't stay where I am because these beliefs I just don't see it anymore. I got to get away from these beliefs, but that's going to require me to take steps out into the world.
Hmm.
And that's very vulnerable and it's terrifying.
Yes.
and, but but that separation that we're taught, it really messes with your mind. And I'm so grateful to know now, having been out for 25 years, that the world is a safe place. Yes, there are things to be mindful of, there are people to be careful of course, but in general, I think the world is a very safe place to be. It's a very benevolent, majestic, fabulous, rich, enriching, enlivening place, and it's confounding and it's difficult, and being a human isn't easy.
Right, but at
But
least you know that. Like at least you know that in the world you can expect good and bad, but in the congregation you expected only good. And so you
yeah,
that's why a lot of bad things go on and nobody
yes,
talks about it because you're not expecting that to happen there. So at least in the world when you go out into it, you kind of have your eyes open to,
yes,
well, unfortunately, I guess as a former witness, your eyes aren't really fully open because you're probably going to expect only negative interactions and negative things because that's what you've been told will happen. But that's not the case. I mean, the world, like you said, is a beautiful place, and people are just people.
sure, absolutely. And a lot of the challenges in the organization, from my point of view, and I'm very blessed. I actually feel really grateful for the way I was raised. I think my parents did a lot of things really well, and I didn't have any of the issues of abuse. Even from in my home or even around me, there was probably I mean, we all know there's this sex abuse scandal in the organization. No big surprise, given that there's a sex abuse scandal in every part of the world now. We see this in all religion, the Catholic Church, obviously, all religions, and we see it in the media. We see, that there's a big coming out with the fact that there's been a lot of abuse in all these quarters. And the challenge in the witness religion, from my point of view, even though I didn't experience those things, they very well could have been happening right under my nose and I was oblivious. That's probably the case.
Yes.
But I mean, I'm sure of it. But you have a lay ministry. You have these lay ministers, many of whom are not emotionally intelligent
Hmm.
and have no training in how to actually deal with um, the real shit that people go through in life. And then their followers, so they have that mentality of listening and then doing what they're told. rather than, thinking independently for themselves, or learning how to actually listen to their intuition or their hearts. So it's a mess. You put that all together, and the elders that I encountered in my time were, many good people, and yet do not and did not have the skills and, to deal with some of this stuff. So
Oh yeah,
anyway,
absolutely. I mean, their first call when if there's an abuse situation is to call the Watchtower headquarters, and often to speak to the legal department. It's
yeah,
not that this isn't an issue of legality; it's an issue of emotions and
yes,
people who are hurt and
yeah,
psychology, and just there's just so much that goes into it beyond legal, and
yes,
which really kind of shows where their concern truly is. But these people aren't equipped, just like you said, they're not equipped to handle such issues, and they shouldn't be handling such issues, which is just kind of a false premise that the organization is set up in the first place, that everyone should filter everything through the elders, and not through their own intellect, or their own feelings, or the proper authorities, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, you have to see that a lot of those elders, they're just people too, and they're not ready for this. They're no one has helped them be equipped to handle everything that is coming along with these what they see as just judicial cases.
yeah.
They're-
It's heartbreaking.
it
It's
is.
heartbreaking, and I'm really happy to see so much conversation and movement around that with other former witnesses that are really bringing this forward. And um, I really wish the best for people that have been through that.
Mhm.
And I'm so grateful to know, and I that there are resources for people that have been through that, and go get support and get it outside of the witness community, because there's a lot of really very skilled people, whether they be therapists or other forms of support, that can help get through that and heal from that kind of an experience.
Absolutely. There was something that you mentioned earlier, that you said you could get into or not, but I think it's a unique angle, not something that a lot of people are always able to see or discuss, and that is, any of the positives that could have come with the upbringing. I think that's what,
Mhm.
as you put it. What would you see as some of the positives of the way that you were raised? And obviously, not everyone has the same experience in the organization. We all know we're all living our own lives, but for you, what were some of the positives that came out of that upbringing for you?
Yeah. Well, so your question is interesting because it's about the positives of the way I was raised. And so when I think of the positives, I include there's things I took away from the religion itself, which I can mention, but the way I was raised, I also
Oh, I was
can look,
including both,
yeah,
including both. It's all a part
yeah.
of it.
So I can look back now with really soft eyes on my parents. My dad's 84. My mother passed away 2 years ago,
Hmm.
um, and I can look now and realize that they were not perfect parents, but they
Hmm.
were the perfect parents for me. And they both did many things really well, and I can acknowledge that and how hard they worked and all that. And also they shunned me, like when it came time, it was like, sorry honey, we have to do this,
Hmm.
and as if there was no choice in the matter. And that was very, very painful for me, the first 5 years, deeply painful, because I had such love and connection and affinity for my family. But the religion, and so, the usual things that you love your parents for. They taught me how to know how to work. They taught me how to keep a schedule. They taught me, as in their own imperfect way, how to love and connect and be open, and um, then, provided for me. And I have a lot of gratitude for all of that. The religion, I talk about this in my memoir. I got to say, like the theocratic ministry school, knocking on doors, all of that has really helped me later in life. I'm an extrovert. I love to talk. My dad said years ago, you've got the gift of gab, and that's certainly true. I really, really love people. I'm extremely curious about other people and interested in them. I just find the human species fascinating, and so that really served me well, knocking on doors and talking to people um, and developing this way of reasoning and thinking and talking to other people. And one of the things I learned how to do was to learn how to debate and disagree with other people without being disagreeable, and always being able to keep it respectful. I think that's one thing I've had to refine that. And obviously I was looking through a very narrow blinders when I was talking about. I mean, I had the truth and I was very, very convinced, and I likely was not open at all in those conversations, but I had a way of really engaging with people and speaking to them that I think was innate in me, but that
Yeah.
got cultivated and also refined over the years, knocking on doors and even just sitting around and talking to my dad. I was the person in our family that could talk to my father about things. And sometimes I would just go to him and go, well, so what do you think about God? Or like, what do you think? I really wondered, like, what's your spiritual life like? How do you make sense of all this stuff
That's an
that's going?
interesting question.
And so he would, we would have conversations, and that was cultivating in me something that I think is very important, which is stay curious and open to what other people have to say.
Hmm.
And so, my work took me in a direction of kind of training, being in front of the room, teaching. I talk about this in detail in my memoir, like simultaneous to my doubts arising. I was also working in a bank, one of the biggest banks in Portland, Oregon, where I am from. I don't live there anymore, but that's where my family's from. And I I was a good worker, and I was working full time, and I'd been pioneering for years and finally got into working full time to, my husband and I were married. It's time to buy a home. Let's think about, maybe should we start a family? Well, if we're going to do that, we need to have more than 10 cents to rub together. So I'm working full time, and I just went from, really being an administrative assistant in this bank to, over the course of maybe 3 or 4 years, starting to be a trainer who was training other people in this one program that we had. And I think the people that I worked for and with saw in me that ability to stand up and talk, because I had been cultivating that my entire life. And so just the theocratic ministry school and all that stuff really helped me professionally. I remember the first time I stood in front of a room and taught something that wasn't, Bible related. It was a totally secular conversation, training people in this program, and realizing, like, oh my God, all of this stuff is transferable. I
Hmm.
mean, and it was exhilarating. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. So I would have to say that, and then the other thing, which there's a million things I could be grateful for, but even being shunned, I wouldn't wish that on anybody, and I wish that hadn't happened. It's one of the great tragedies of my life, and um, I've I've come to a place of great acceptance and equanimity around it, and yet it still is a source of great sadness. And yet, I can even be grateful for the experience in the level of compassion that it's brought to me, and this way that I'm connected to millions of people around the world who share that experience. I know what that's like in a way that nobody else does. You do too. People listening to this, it's like, I know what that's like. And it's the worst thing you can do to another human being, in my opinion.
I
Um,
agree.
and, I'm not against the Jehovah's Witness religion. I think, and by that I mean, I think that it's a satisfying spiritual path for some people. And it certainly was a very satisfying path for me for the first, say, 30 years of my life. And I know people in that religion that, as far as I can tell, are quite fulfilled and satisfied by it. So if that's their path, you know, go be with it. But I am completely against these things which I think are unchristian and immoral, such as shunning and, of course, abuse, which anything that's we've all agreed as a human collective group is morally wrong.
Hmm.
Those things are wrong in all communities, including the witnesses. So I'm completely against shunning. I think it's a horrible practice. And yet I can look back on that experience for myself and see the ways that it's actually softened me, it's opened me, it's informed me, and it's been able to connect me to a greater human experience. And everybody is shunned in one way or another in their life at some point. Everyone has that experience, not to the extent you and I have, where it's deep and long and permanent with people that you used to be really close to. That's different. But people, I'm hearing from people, since I wrote my memoir, like, oh my God, I've been wondering about this religion. I picked it up because I wanted to understand it better and I could relate. And I get these emails from people telling me their stories of being shunned, which are, sometimes secular in academic circles. Somebody comes up with some new idea and they get shunned by their colleagues.
Hmm.
And, there's a million stories out there. And so I have an affinity um, for that experience that I never had before.
Yeah, I think that it is an interesting point, and one that's not talked about often, and that is that you know, I think it's a great lesson that can be derived from what you said there about shunning, and that is that very few things in life are all good or all bad. There's a yin and a yang to life.
Hmm.
Shunning, it's very painful, but it also connects you to this. You lose one community, but you're also now connected to another community. Um, Shunning also, it's not always easy to say when you lose your family, but sometimes those family members were very toxic.
Yes,
And sometimes it's for the best that you're not around those toxic people because
yes,
they are toxic to you. Maybe they're not toxic to everybody, but to you at least, they are toxic. And
that's right.
it's something that you know that is kind of a protection in some way. Ultimately, shunning is not necessarily loving. It's not a great experience by any means, but that also doesn't mean that there is no light at the end of the tunnel. um,
Yeah, I've received questions. Somebody asked me, I did a book tour when my book came out, and somebody said, "Do you think it's ever okay to shun somebody?" And I said, "Absolutely." I mean, in abusive relationships, if somebody's being abusive to you, if it's no longer a fit, there can definitely be times when we need to cut off connections with people, and we're initiating that as well. And of course, these things take discernment, if we all belong somewhere. This is the thing that's we all need to find where we belong and our people. And I've said this to lots of people in the last year that have been very distraught because maybe they're early in their shunning experience. And it's like, you know what? Your people are out there, man. Your people, the people that really love you, the people that will really accept you, they're out there. And it's a very vulnerable thing, in many ways. If our lives were completely immersed in that religion, it's very vulnerable. You may just have two friends for a while or one good friend. And I remember my mother saying when I left, it's like, you're not going to find any good friends out there. You can only count on your friends in the truth, but out there, people, the worldly people, are going to let you down. I mean, she's, that was, I just, that reverberates, and it makes me laugh now because that was her fear. That was the power of beliefs, and that's a belief that my mother had totally absorbed. But what I have found and I believe you have as well, because in hearing you and your story and your podcast is, it's like, you know what? The I have what I now call a soul family. I have relationships with amazing people that I've cultivated over the last 25 years, and people that have really been there for me. And I've had, my share of challenges. I had breast cancer, diagnosed with that. It's completely behind me now. It's like 6 or 7 years ago. My husband, my second husband, who I married after leaving the truth, he got very sick and passed away quite suddenly. And so I've experienced very difficult things in my life since leaving, and man, I know who my friends are. I know who I can count on, and I have amazing people in my corner. It took time to find them, and it
Hmm.
took time to really trust those relationships. I remember to I even talk about this in my memoir. Like I I left Portland, Oregon within a year of all of my doubts and leaving my marriage, and I moved to Chicago, which was one of the best things that could have happened for me, to actually physically remove myself from Portland, to get out of that physical space and be dropped in kind of a neutral space that was fresh and new. And that was a really good thing. I went there I accepted a job in that city and moved there. And it was very scary because I was newly divorced. I only knew two people in that city, and I had this new job. Um, and I remember sitting in my apartment one day thinking, maybe mom's right. I mean, what if mom's right? I don't think my mother's right. I don't think that religion's right. But if she's right, I'm screwed. I mean, Armageddon could come tomorrow and I am screwed.
Hmm.
I mean, it's over for me. And that's the kind of fear that I had to work through. I no longer think that way, but I certainly did in those early years and days. And I remember thinking, oh my God, if I fall down in the shower or knock my head unconscious somehow, nobody might find me for like days because I don't, like maybe if I don't show up for work on Monday, people would think, well, that's odd. Linda's really reliable. She's always here. I wonder if she's okay. But that would be a couple days. And I started thinking, who can I count on? And it was a very vulnerable thing. And then you add a couple years onto that, and I started making friends and really good friends. And I felt like, okay, now I do have people I could call on if I really needed help. But I didn't know yet how strong those bonds were because I hadn't had them for very long and they hadn't been tested by tragedy or challenges or, requests. Can you help me with something? And of course, now I have had years go by and I have tried and true and tested friendships, relationships, and connections. And I know that I've found my place by following things that I'm interested in, things that I'm curious about, causes that speak to my heart. I got involved with an environmental organization and took trips down to the Amazon and and that took me totally extracurricular. That isn't really my profession, but that took me into a community of like-minded people, and I have deep friends and connections there. I I started getting interested in coaching, and I got certified as a coach and do mostly work in the corporate world. And that took me into communities, and I've made amazing friends and connections through that work. And then I got interested in mindfulness and emotional intelligence and learning how to meditate and teach that in places. And that's taken me into all kinds of different places. So by following my heart and pursuing the things that have interested me, I've found my people. And
Yeah.
that's how it works, right?
Yeah. So it sounds like, you've really kind of built a beautiful life after Watchtower. Um, how would you compare and contrast the feelings that you have in your life now compared to when you were living as one of Jehovah's Witnesses? Do you feel like the the feelings that you have now as a human being are comparable or better than or maybe less than your experience when you were following this one path that you had been given. Like, what do you find now that's different about your life that maybe you appreciate?
Oh man, it's 50 million bazillion times better. Um, I never, of course, when you're in that world, you don't realize how maybe much you're holding back or are suppressed in your expression. But gradually, the more that I've been out in the world, I've become more and more. I've been getting clearer and clearer, and also been able to recognize and listen to my own things that I want to do, want to say, want to be, go, and there aren't any no's anymore. So I find that there's this way now that I'm saying yes to life in a way that has opened up my experience to where I feel like I'm really really alive and I'm present and I'm accounted for and I'm a grown up. I'm not waiting for some cosmic janitor to come down and fix the earth.
Hmm.
There's that expression, I don't know where it comes. We're the ones we've been waiting for.
Yep.
I mean, I've heard that attributed to Native Americans. I've heard it attributed to a lot of different sources, but it's like I, I, um, I say in my book, I don't need Jesus Christ to save me. That's my job. That's my responsibility. And I believe in Christ. I believe in many of the things he taught, but I also believe in other spiritual teachers. I think, Gandhi had it going on. So does His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I have amazing teachers I've found in my own journey that maybe are lesser known, men and women that are amazing people, and none of them are responsible for my salvation. That's
Yeah, I
my
think
job.
I think that, just what you're saying there, personal accountability, you're responsible for yourself. It's not to be farmed out to somebody else. And this openness that you have, and what a contrast that is to such a closed group like Jehovah's Witnesses, where it's, the us versus them. Being able to have that openness allows you to find your path instead of following a prescribed path that was set for you as a child.
That's right.
And so
That's
that it's such a beautiful way to live. Um, we got away from your story a little bit as a witness. I think what I would like to ask you, like, obviously you were a true blue believer, like you said.
hmm
Um, how did the path go for you getting out? So you obviously believed, you pioneered, you did these things.
hmm
Kind of what were the moments, or what was it that
Yeah.
kind of put the crack there for you to where you could start seeing that maybe there was a way out?
Yep. It was in the door to door ministry. By the way, this is the first 10 pages of my memoir because I start with where the trouble began, which was knocking on doors, and I came upon a coworker, this man that I worked with at the bank.
Oh, we always hated coming across somebody we knew.
Yes and no. I mean,
Or a
I was
lot of people did anyway. I
yeah,
did.
I totally get that, but well known. I mean, it was well known, and
Yeah.
I was people liked and cared about me where I worked. It was a good environment, and I had a great relationship with this one guy, and I respected him so much, and I knew some things about him personally, and I just knew that he was a really high caliber human being. And I knock on the door, and I'm kind of bored with it all. I really wasn't into being there. I was tired, and it's like, okay, let's get our 2 hours in. That was the space that I was in. And here he comes, and it's like, oh, and I jumped into this spiel, that I'd been saying 50 bazillion times my whole life. And I heard myself saying, um, and God will destroy the wicked. And the word destroy, I mean, there was kind of this out of body experience that I had where I almost saw myself and heard myself from a distance. It's like, I'm basically telling this man that if he doesn't get on the right team, he's going to be destroyed.
Hmm.
That's what I just said. And it just was so unsettling. It's like, I wrapped up. I gave him the tract. Have a nice day. See you at the. And I couldn't get out of there fast enough. And that was, Leonard Cohen has this thing that the cracks are how the light gets in, and
Hmm.
that just cracked. There's a little crack, and I couldn't get that conversation out of my mind. And of course, I knew that I'd been saying that, and that I believed the wicked would be destroyed if they did. I mean, I believed all that, but I just
Hmm.
heard it in a new way that I'd never heard before because of who this person
Yeah,
was.
because you could see him as a human being and not just the next door you're knocking on.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And that just opened me up, and I kept it to myself for months while I ruminated on this, and thought, I'm not sure about this. Is God really this vindictive that he would destroy a person like this? And it's like, well, but no, Jehovah's a loving God. But this guy's great. But the Bible says this. So I had this internal back and forth,
Hmm.
and I started just opening up and seeing things in a new way. And I didn't tell my husband at the time. We were this, that couple you see that is, at all the meetings and properly dressed and raising their hand and doing, very much involved in the congregation. My husband was a ministerial servant. And then I have this inner turmoil, and I started to see a therapist because I thought I need to talk to somebody about this. Um, and I can't talk to any of my friends, and all my best friends were witnesses, and I knew what I was going to get from them.
Oh
I
yeah.
knew I knew what I would get there, and wisely I just kept this all to myself. And I saw a therapist, and that was the beginning of understanding that I wasn't mentally ill or crazy, that I had been suppressing a lot of things that I had wanted to say and do my whole life. And it was perfectly healthy to examine one's beliefs, especially things as important as your destiny. And all these are big questions. And I also knew that it could affect my marriage. And so that's a brief answer to your question. It just kind of set me in a direction. And I'm
Yeah,
so
yeah.
glad that I listened. I'm
Yeah.
so glad that I listened to those questions. I really am.
So ultimately, then, what was your path out? I mean, was it did you fade? I mean, obviously you've been shunned, so I'm guessing you didn't fade. Did you
No,
disassociate, or were you disfellowshipped, or like what was your eventual path that broke you out officially? Officially, excuse me.
I um, I came to the realization. I well, I shared. I started, really declining in field service hours and everything. People started
Yeah.
getting concerned about me, and I have a. I described this scene in my memoir where I really went to my husband in a moment of just sheer openness and love and care, because he's a really good guy, and he really loved me. He really did. And I said, I've got to share with you. This is what's going on. I'm doubting. I had this experience at the door. This happened 6 months ago. And he's like, oh. And he says, well, let's go. You should go talk to the elders about that. And, and I remember realizing, okay, he sees me as spiritually ailing.
Hmm.
I'm not spiritually ailing. And I just assured him, I'll work this out, sweetie. I'll work this out. And I continued on my way. And in that process, got farther and farther away from him, like emotionally,
Sure.
mentally, and also from the religion. And I then, after me not taking any action, he spoke to the elders on his own, because that's what we do, right? That's what the
Yes.
witnesses do.
Yep.
Let's rally around the ailing and help
Yep.
them.
He's going
And
to quote
he
help you.
helped me. And
Hmm.
I was so, so angry and insulted that he would do that. And all of a sudden I realized how far I drifted. I'm telling you, it's not your business. It's not the elder's business. He goes, well, we'll sit down and talk to them. I go, well, you can talk to them if you want to. I don't have anything to say to these people. But as soon as he did that, I realized it was over.
Yeah.
That the spotlight had been put on me, and people were going to start coming out of the woodwork. And I don't remember how much time it took, but I just got really clear, and I went to to my husband and I said, this marriage is over and I'm going to take a break. I wasn't yet ready to leave, but I said, I need to take a break. No meetings, no whatever. I'm getting my own apartment. I've seen an attorney. I'm getting a divorce. I was very, very clear. And I had thought about this. And I won't get into the reasons why I was clear the marriage was over. Um, but I also understood that he wasn't going to have any kind of life without me in that religion, that would be very
Hmm.
hard for him. And also we were starting to go in some majorly big directions. And I will just say, quick segue, I have heard from him here and there over the years. He's remarried. He had a couple kids, and he's checked in on me a few times over the years. He's been very kind, and he also has thanked me, said that was really hard and it was the right thing to do.
Wow,
Yep.
that's not the usual case. Good for you.
That's not,
That's
he had that. That's what true
and good
love
for
is.
him. Yeah.
Yep, true love. You really love somebody. You can see what they really need and what you need. And but I basically, it all like happened pretty fast once I decided that this was the way for me, and it was terrifying and it was exhilarating. And so there was this little parade of a come to Jesus conversation with him. This marriage is over. This is what I'm doing. You can't change my mind. My mind's made up. This is what I'm doing.
Hmm.
He's like, okay, let's go tell the elders. And then I said, okay, fine. Now I'm ready to go to the elders. I'm happy to go to the elders. And
Let's
I
talk.
also describe that in my book, and that experience of going in,
Yeah.
and it really pissed me off because they had their way with me and read me scriptures, but they also accused him of not presiding over his family in a fine manner. And I said, this is not him. This is all
Oh,
me. And
yeah.
but I found my voice in it was really interesting to hear me say to them, can we have your address of your new apartment? We'd love to come, um, touch in on you. And it was like, I know where to find you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I know where to find you. And then, to go and tell my parents what I was up to, that I had asked for this divorce, I was ending my marriage. And that's a whole other scene and also very heartbreaking. And I was very, very clear, and I was right, that my family would shun me. They were very devoted. I knew what I was going to be giving up, and I had no doubt, and they completely, lived up to my understanding. My older sister, she talked to me and tried to talk me out of it. My brother tried to talk me out of it. My brother started shunning me immediately as soon as I made that decision to leave my marriage. He really wouldn't have anything to do with me, and it took another year for me to actually get disfellowshipped. But my brother was a little ahead of the curve on that because he was so angry with me and upset,
Oh,
and
yeah.
he was
I
losing.
understand. We went through that too, so I understand. That the pre-shunning.
Yes, and then just to continue, I'm just kind of trying to hit the high points here of how I left. So I got my own apartment. I'm now inactive, more or less. People are just kind of have their eye on me, and my mother gave my phone number to various people in the area that had I'd known, and I would come home and have 8 voicemail messages from people saying, "Linda, we just heard. Oh, please don't leave Jehovah," or "Linda." And some were very nice. Some were like, "Linda, I heard about this, and I'm really sorry. If there's anything I can do, please call me." That kind of stuff. But
Hmm.
I had a lot of people with their eye on me, and I was also like for the first time enjoying free Saturdays, and I'm going to go for a bike ride, or I'm going to go to the bookstore and hang out at Pal's Books, or I'm going to go to the matinee, or and wow, new opening and this exhilaration, and also just the terror of, God, I don't really know what the hell I believe anymore. And gosh, Armageddon comes right now. This could be really bad for me if it really is the truth. But I don't think it is. And then in very short order, I got a job opportunity that took me to Chicago. And I just realized that was exactly what I needed, that I needed to get away from Portland.
Hmm.
I had grown up in Portland. 500 people came to our wedding. I had been in that marinating in that soup and knew so many people that I go out, somewhere and likely run into somebody from some congregation somewhere that I knew. So I took that opportunity and I moved to Chicago. And within a year, I was being disfellowshipped. And what happened in that year is I got established in a new job. I realized that I would be okay, there. I made some new friends. I went back to the Kingdom Hall a couple of times to try it on for size, and it always felt horrible. But I did that because I was trying to figure out if there was any way I could stay in and still have a relationship with my family.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to be true to myself. I was tired of pretending I was anything but what I was. I just wanted to live my life in transparency and be who I was, what I was, whatever that was, even if I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And my sister and people during that time, do you believe in God? What's going to happen to you? And I said, you know what? I understand your certainty. I used to be certain like that. I don't have answers to your questions. I'm figuring that out. And I think, a big gift to myself was giving myself permission not to know everything, not to
Oh,
understand.
yes.
Like it's okay not to have answers for every single
Absolutely.
thing. And within that year, and then I also started having relationships. I had got a boyfriend. I was, having sex. Oh my God, and this was no longer outside of my own moral compass. It was something that did not feel wrong to me, even though it was scary. But in that year, I was hiding this from my family. I wasn't talking about what my life was really like, and I found that a terrible way to live. And then also my husband, we're divorced on paper. The
Yep.
law of the land says we're divorced, but we're
Mm-hmm.
not divorced in God's eyes. So he would call me from time to time, like, Linda, are you coming back? Are you, is there a chance we could work this out? And I'm like, oh my God. I was really hiding these relationships because I was not yet ready to be DF'd and completely cut off. I was working up and processing the courage to get there, but I wasn't there yet. That took a full year from when I went to Chicago to when I finally got in touch with the local elders in Chicago and personally initiated the process, the judicial process. These are elders that had met me when I'd come to the Kingdom Hall in Chicago. There's a whole other segue story of my big sister coming to stay with me in Chicago and dragging me to the Kingdom Hall and, stuff like that. So I was a known person there to some degree. And even got invited to some of the witness homes a few times for social things that were nice. And it was nice for me being a new person in a new city, but also, seeing the differences between witnesses and my new friends, and just noticing that I felt more comfortable with my new community and new friends and freer and more like myself when I was with them. So finally, I realized I'm going to tell the truth about what's going on in my life. And I need to tell that to my ex husband so that he's free. He's devoted. He's going to stick this out and he's having a hell of a time, being a single guy who's not free.
Yeah, and just for any who are listening who maybe don't understand what that means, just because they were divorced does not mean he's free to remarry or get into another relationship until one of the partners has moved on sexually, according to Jehovah's Witnesses. So that's how he's not quote free, because he's kind of trapped in that he can't move on with his life and having relationships, because neither of them has moved on sexually. That's how they see it. So
Yeah, I called it the double bind.
yes,
There's
it
no
is.
way in that. And this is the power of beliefs, right, Michael?
Yes,
This is the
absolutely.
power of beliefs, and beliefs can change, but beliefs run our lives. I mean, I
Hmm.
know that I even have beliefs right now that run my life, some of which are probably really spot on, and some that I will likely change in the
Yep.
future.
Yeah. And there's
But
nothing wrong with changing your beliefs. Like if you believe the same thing from the time you're a kid to you're an adult, like where did you grow?
right.
Somewhere in the process you were supposed to grow.
That's right. That's right. And so I did. I went to my ex-husband in private and I said, listen, I need to tell you something. And he's like, it was very hard for him to hear. He said,
Yeah.
I've been hoping for this day and waiting to hear this, but man, he says, your parents are just going to be so upset. I mean, he was on my side.
Yeah.
He says, when are you telling your parents? And I said, I'm telling them tomorrow. And then the next day I told my parents and, my family, and they in no uncertain terms made it clear that, and I told them, I've been to the elders. I've, I've had a relationship. I have no regrets about what I've done or where my life is going. I have no regrets. I'm not repentant. I really can't say I'm sorry about anything I've done over this last year. I'm in this process of exploration and, do what you will. And they said,
Hmm.
honey, you talk like that, you're going to get yourself disfellowship. And I go, yeah, I think you're right. I'm so sorry. But yeah, if that's what it is. And honestly, I look back now and I realized I didn't need to subject myself to any kind of official thing. And I never had to meet with the elders. I could have written a letter and said whatever I said.
Right.
For some reason, I was still, even then, this is how deep the grooves of these kinds of religions get in our psyche. I was still being a good girl. And it was very important for me to do things the right way.
Yep.
And I did that. I met with the elders. I came back from Portland where I was having these conversations with my family and really to kind of say goodbye to them and still tell them I love you, but this is what I'm doing and do what you have to do. But this is the state of affairs. And wow, it was very hard. The elders they read the letter in a Chicago congregation where very few people knew me,
Hmm.
and that was in July of 1995. And my and I, it's a very difficult thing, but that was the beginning. I was on my way to a new and better life, and the best. I'll tell you some of the best advice that I got during this time was somebody said, you know what you should do? I'd recommend you go church shopping. And she said, I don't think you're ever going to find a religion that fits you, like an organized religion that really suits you. But you have been so tucked away in this certain kind of belief. Why not just expose yourself to various beliefs just for the sake of doing that?
Hmm.
And I took that to heart. And I didn't rush out and go from one church to the next weekend after weekend. I was having way too much fun for that. But, I made friends to a meditation class, and I met a woman who's now a dear friend still years later, and she was a lapsed Catholic. And she said, do you want to come to Catholic Mass with me? Or, and I'd be like, yeah, I would love to do that. Can you explain to me what the hell's going on when afterwards? And, a guy that I dated went to an Episcopal church from time to time. And he says, oh, let's go to that. And even a Christian Scientist, a friend, it was like, well, I think you guys are considered to be as weird as Jehovah's Witnesses, right? She goes, yeah, kind of. Like, well, let's go see what this is about. And
That's funny. My grandfather was Christian Scientist.
um, and I've continued along that way. I've formed over the years a very eclectic spirituality
Yeah.
that is accepting. It's very egalitarian and accepting of various beliefs. I really do believe there is good in all religions. We used to hate it when people said that, but I've found that to be true in my own experience, and certainly good people in all religions. And misguided, I think my parents, are deeply confused. They're confused about what the proper expression of love is, and I think this has been a great tragedy for them as well as me. We sometimes forget that, our parents have unfulfilled dreams of their own, and I certainly was one of those for my parents.
Hmm.
And yet, I'm, I meditate. I find that to be a very enriching practice. I like to do Buddhist retreats, about once a year, just so I can keep walking my talk when I'm teaching other people how to do that. But I don't call myself a Buddhist. I was at a retreat in the years ago. Well, for my 40th birthday, I gifted myself a week at a Buddhist retreat center in the south of France with a Zen Buddhist monk. He's a master named Thich Nhat Hanh. And Thich
Oh, I've heard of him. Does he have books or something?
tons of books. He's
Okay.
very, very prolific. And, sad to say, he's actually transitioning out of this world right now. He's in his 80s. And,
Oh.
but I got to see him when he was like 73
Hmm.
and spent a week at his retreat center. And that was a very profound experience for me. And one of the things I'd like to say about him, he taught me this thing about interconnectedness. He's a poet and a writer, and he says, look at this piece of paper, and what do you see? If you're holding a piece of paper in your hand, he says, well, there's the wood, that was the trees that made the trees that made the paper. So there's the trees in this paper, and there's the sunshine that helped the trees grow, and there's the lumberjack that cut down the tree, and there's the sandwich that the lumberjack ate before, to keep him going that day when he did his work. And there's the road that was paved to carry the wood to the place, to the paper mill. And you get the idea. It's just
Yeah.
this so
We're disconnected because we don't see those processes.
right.
But
And
to see
I
what's
remember,
behind it is a beautiful thing.
yeah, I remember being blown away, like,
Yeah.
oh God, we are part of this big web. And it made me feel so much better about my circumstances. So yes, I've been cut off from my family, but and in a certain way, that's also just an illusion. I'm still connected to them in this interconnected way that I'm connected to everyone and everything. And that was a profound learning and comfort to me. And out of that, I started reading more of his work. And a gift for my 40th birthday was to go spend a week in retreat with him. And then my husband picked me up, met me, and we spent a week of like major decadence of eating French food and bicycling through the French countryside, doing all these things, which are those are fun things to do when you have big years and big things to celebrate. So it was a very balanced 40th birthday. A week in a Buddhist retreat center, walking meditation and meditating every day and eating very simply, and then, going off and celebrating life in another way for
Yeah.
another. Yeah.
But life doesn't that's a beautiful thing though. Life doesn't have to be all one way, and that's something where we grew up with a life that was set out to be one certain way, but you know, how can you really say that you're living when you're not experiencing life? It's no way to live. Um,
Yeah.
you've talked about, kind of a lot of these beautiful things that you have in this new life of openness and exploration. Do you feel like, well, obviously it does, but how does your past life still impact you? Like, do you see little places where it still comes up?
Yes. And I've been, in preparation for this conversation, I've been trying to think of ways, and they're so seldom,
Yeah.
honestly.
Well, that's what we all want. We all want them to become fewer and farther between. I mean, you've got 25 years out. A lot of people
Yeah.
don't, but that's
Yeah.
awesome. That's like hashtag life goals or whatever.
Yeah, I'm sure it does in ways that I might not even be aware of, but over the years, I think my capacity for self-awareness and self-reflection has definitely grown
Yeah.
as I've grown, and so that I can actually see myself as I really am, not as I would hope I would be,
Hmm.
and that I can see myself as I really am without a lot of judgment or blame, but with compassion. The biggest way I think it shows up is in perfectionism.
Mm.
I lean towards perfectionism. I'm also very optimistic. I really just expect the best and for things to work out. I've been that way since I was, zero. It's just kind of part of my makeup. But I have really high standards for myself. As you know, our form of religion, there was a right way to do things and a wrong way. Everything was black and white.
Absolutely.
And I noticed that kind of thinking in myself, and it's softened a lot. And I'm also really hard on myself. I can be really critical. And, I bring a lot of compassion to that. I ran across a quote that I think of a lot, and it's by a Buddhist teacher, Suzuki Roshi. He's a Japanese teacher, and he says, "You are perfect just the way you are, and you could use a little improvement."
That sounds a lot like the was it you as you are now are enough? You
Oh, I
know,
love.
like it's a concept of being enough, but yeah, we all have room to grow as well.
Yeah, so there's also just seeing the perfection in things exactly as they are.
Hmm.
Like it may not be exactly how I want it to be, but just to see the perfection in things as they are, and then when I don't meet my own standard for myself, to take a breath and hold that with a kind of compassion and just there's a lot of research. We haven't talked about the neuroscience of shunning, but um, there's a lot of research coming out of the social sciences about the role that compassion plays in our own growth and development, and there's just tons of information coming out about the role that having compassion for oneself can play in growing. That the harder we are and self-critical, the more the harder it is to grow, to develop, to
Hmm.
expand. And so I just remind myself, if I was sitting across from my best friend and my best friend was saying these things to me, would I stand for that? Would that person still be my friend?
Yeah.
I wouldn't. And also just to have compassion for the predicament of being a human being, because I don't have these struggles because I'm a former Jehovah's Witness. I have these struggles because I'm a human. And everybody in the world, and I coach people that are super successful, that you think have the world by the tail, and they're awesome and they're wonderful, and they do. And in those quiet moments when they're honest and reveal their vulnerability, all of us have these things that we struggle with.
Hmm.
So just to remind myself of that. But the perfectionism would be one thing that still is with me, that I grapple with.
Yeah, that's a very common thing that people kind of walk away with. I dealt with it a lot myself. I mean, I will say that I will always be just like a person who's was an alcoholic is still an alcoholic. They're just a recovering alcoholic. I'm
Hmm.
a recovering perfectionist. I will always have those traits that I have to kind of watch and pay attention to. And that's okay. We all have things that are going to travel with us in life. None of us are ever going to be perfect. Um, you had mentioned the neuroscience of shunning, and you know, so I guess that kind of really coincides with how your past life could still impact you. I mean, you are still shunned.
Yeah.
What is some of that neuroscience? I know you've been really involved in some of that. Kind of, can you give us some high points there to consider, and if that still applies to you, kind of how that still shows up for you in life?
So uh, I've been in this question since publishing my memoir and hearing from people, just like you hear from people, like, how can I serve this community? So right now I'm living in this question of, should I create a course? Um, I've come up with a name called Leaving the Fold. So I'm that far, and I don't know if it's online or if it's people coming to some kind of a one day. I don't know that, but what I know is there's a way that I want to support people to have honorable closure, and to honorable closure is one area that my work has taken me in, which is to help people. I've created a 4-step process for having skillful endings. So
Hmm.
this could apply to being shunned. And I hear a lot in you and the 4-week course that you offer, this way of looking at your past and figuring out what that story is and how we can actually invent the next story. That's something that I
Yes.
do. And in all this process, I became aware of a professor at Purdue University by the name of Kip Williams. And Kip Williams is a expert on social ostracism. Like, oh, that's an interesting term,
Oh
social
yeah, I
ostracism.
love that term.
So he's a professor of psychology at Purdue, in Indiana. And so he's developed different studies, and I just found it fascinating. And so I kind of went down this rabbit hole, and I've been in communication with him. And but here's the high point: is we have a pain matrix in our brain that lights up whenever we're experiencing like physical pain, right?
Hmm.
And with MRI imaging and various ways, they can actually monitor that. And there have been ways they've been able to, not Dr. Williams, but others, to monitor, the capacity for empathy, um, and that sort of thing. But anyway, if you and I were in the same room right now, Michael, and you were up against an MRI machine being scanned, and I actually slapped you across the face, that physical pain would light up the pain matrix in your
Right.
brain. That's just, that's the way we're wired. Well, it turns out those same parts of the brain light up when we're shunned.
Hmm.
It's so interesting to me. And so, what does that mean? Well, first of all, it helped me understand why you can feel so physically terrible. Like the emotional impact of that, it's impacting our physiology. And so the same way that we would care for if somebody slapped us across the face, we'd go, ow, and we'd grab that, we'd tend to that part of our face. You'd be like, wait a minute. And then the next thing would be like, what are you doing? And stop it and knock it off. And,
I'll be honest, I might tend to you first.
fair enough. Fair enough. Absolutely. But either way, when that initial outburst is done, then what?
Right.
It's still in there. So there's more to be said about that, but I think it's really important, at least it was for me. And this is something I just uncovered in the last year is, and for that reason, it can even make sense in times of great pain, or when you're going to be encountering your family, and you're going to be shunned, you have to go to a wedding or a funeral or something. It can even be useful to take pain relievers like Tylenol, for instance. That's a recommended way to actually help. It's not the only way to deal with it, but actually that's not inappropriate.
Interesting. I like
Yeah,
that. And that's
yeah,
something so simple that anyone can do.
yeah. And you think, oh, good grief, give me a break. I'm going to take a Tylenol for being shunned. That's not what I'm recommending. I'm just saying that our bodies are impacted by this experience. We already knew that
Right.
intuitively, but when I heard about the neuroscience, it just helps us understand the impact. And what another thing, not to dwell on it, but I asked Dr. Williams, I go, have you done any research on the impact on the people that shun?
Hmm.
And he said, yeah, there's been less research on that. It's not very clear. Uh, there's not a lot to say there that you draw any conclusions, but it's not good for them either.
Oh no, as a person who shunned other people, because I did, as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I think that most of us did at some point. Um, yeah, it's not easy. It sucks. If it is easy for you to shun other people, then I think that cults on some level root out your humanity. Um, if you are if it's easy for you to shun other human beings, then perhaps your humanity has been rooted out a little bit too much.
Mm, yeah.
For me, I always still felt that. I still knew like it didn't feel right. It didn't feel good. I didn't like it. Um, it just always felt like the wrong thing to do emotionally, even if intellectually I was explaining it away with certain doctrines that I was taught, to kind of deaden my feelings. In the end, yeah, it hurts. It's not good for the people who are shunning you either.
Well, you have to other people to the
Yes.
extent that they're not me. They're
Yeah.
other,
You
and
dehumanize them.
yes, and this is behind racism. This is behind abuse.
Yep.
This is behind all kinds of things. This is the only way that we can be so cruel to each other is if we just don't see them as this other person as human.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
and that there's an impact on us when we deaden that much of ourselves that we no longer see a person as human.
Hmm.
There really is. It's fascinating, that they actually have the MRIs and everything to show some of this out. That's fascinating. I don't know. Do you know if he has any? Like, has he written a book, or is there anything that he's put out there into the world?
He hasn't written, well, he's written books that would be for other professionals to
Gotcha.
read,
Yeah.
necessarily for the public.
Yes.
And, if you Googled Kip Williams Purdue, you could get to a Wikipedia page, or you could also locate him. And I've just found him very open. He's sent me papers that he's written that have ended up in professional journals and so forth. And yeah, he's a pretty great guy.
That's fascinating. Maybe I'll include that in the resources along with your book and
Mhm.
some other things, and maybe people can look at that who want some additional help. Um, see, it seems like one of the questions I always ask people at the end is, what do you enjoy about your new life since leaving? I think you've talked a lot about that, but what
Mhm.
dreams do you have for your life? Like, you've obviously had a lead time here. You've got 25 years in, you've worked on yourself, you have already mentioned that you desire to help people in this community, but
Mhm.
what other dreams might you have for yourself, or for maybe what you could do to impact this world at large?
Yeah, for me, it's just a continuum
Gotcha.
of more of the same.
You're living your dreams.
Yeah, I really am.
That's really a beautiful place to be.
Yeah, yeah. I was talking to a friend the other day, and the Powerball got up to like 900 million or something. It's like, yeah, I think I'll go buy a ticket. What the hell? I could, the cash lump sum is 400,000, and we laughed. And of course, I no longer think that's an immoral thing to do. It's just perfectly fine.
Sure.
But I said to my friend, I feel like I've already won the lottery, honestly. I mean, um, and I mean that I'm really grateful for my life, and I see the potential in the world. I also think there's a lot to be saddened by, but for me, it's just a continuum. I want to continue to travel. I love to travel. I want to learn. I want to grow. I yes, I want to find out what is my contribution over and above my book. There seems to be something more, and I'll figure that out and post that on my website or make it happen when it's meant to be. Um, and in 3 weeks, Michael, I'm going to take off and spend 3 weeks in Paris. I found a woman through one of the exchanges that's online to swap her apartment for my apartment.
Oh
So
yeah.
I'm going to be staying in somebody's home while she's in my home. And I'm going to I'm just it's taken work, and it's been one of my dreams to. I've been through Paris 3 or 4 times, but only for a day or two at a time. And it's one of my places that I feel most inspired and connected. And it's like, I'd like to spend more time there. How could I make that happen? And after mulling on that for a while, you start seeing ways you can make things work. And for me, to have that even be affordable, it was, well, you swap apartments. The most expensive part of anything like that is
Hmm.
that, and I have work that I can do that still allows me to do it from a distance. So I won't be working full time, but I won't, I'll be working some while I'm there. So it's not like a big old vacation, but it's just a way of dropping myself into an environment. And this has been a dream I've had for a long time. So I'll go do that. And, there's things like that to do. Um,
Congratulations. That's a really cool thing to be able to do. And I like the fact that you'll still have work to do, because
yes.
you're going to be living in somebody else's house, just a regular house in Paris,
Hmm.
and you're going to be living life in Paris. You're going to be living, a kind of someone else's life on a level in that you're in their place, but
Hmm.
also bringing some of your life too. And I think that's really cool. It's fascinating to get to see how other people live and to be able to immerse yourself in it. And you're getting to do that while adding some of your own into it with you. That's a beautiful way to be able to take that trip. I love that. I love that.
Yeah. Thank you. And so those are the kinds of dreams I have now, where I get ideas like, that would be kind of a fun thing to go do. And I no longer think in limitations or no,
Yeah.
or like, oh, you can do that later, when the new system comes or what, like, but it's like, I wonder, instead of like, well, that's kind of a wild plan. I now just go, well, isn't that interesting? I wonder how that could work.
Hmm.
And just having that kind of a question with any kind of dream that comes to me opens up, you know, possibilities, and I start seeing things, or I say it out loud to a couple people and they go, have you thought about exchanging? I have a friend that's exchanged, 15 times all over the world with people. And be like, really? That's interesting. And then you follow that and you carry that forward. And
Yeah. It's just
yeah.
awareness, being aware that you want a thing and putting that out into the world, and you start to see different ways that things can open up to you, or talking to people about it.
Hmm.
Um, it's so much more free than the limitations that we once lived with. And I'm glad that you get to experience those, and you're sharing those with other people, and you're coaching people and helping people to see those things for themselves. And that's just a beautiful life to live.
Yeah. So kind of like that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome.
Great.
Um, yeah. So, yeah, I think that's what I'd like to do is ask you, one more time. Could you kind of share with everybody um, what your book is, the title, where they can get it, and maybe your website?
Oh, thank you. So my book is titled Shunned: How I Lost My Religion and Found Myself. It's really available wherever books are sold. If it's not on the shelf, they can order it for you. But of course, it's on Amazon via ebook or regular book.
Hmm.
And my name is Linda A. Curtis, and that's my website is lindaacurtis.com. So people can go there. I'm also on Facebook as Linda Curtis, um, and I have a Facebook page for my honorable closure work too, which is kind of the broader umbrella of all the stuff that I do tied to mindfulness, just helping people that are in major transitions
Hmm.
to experience honorable closure and, to move into the future and be unencumbered by the past.
I think that's what all of us are trying to do. So
Here, here.
I'll be sure to share all that, and I want people to be able to find that. And I really appreciate getting to talk to you today.
Likewise, and I just want to thank you. Really, Michael, the work you're doing is so important. And it's just, I'm so happy that I really just stumbled on your website. Your website and your podcast, I don't really even know how. It just showed up, obviously. Seriously, I'm driving down the road and this podcast, it hit my podcast, and yours came up, and it was the interview you did with Silver.
Hmm.
And I was so touched by that. It's like, who is this guy? He's doing amazing work. This is so important. And so I just want to thank you for what you're bringing to this conversation. I know you're just helping and will be helping really hundreds of people, and it's going to ripple out. It's rippling out, you know, which is a great way to make a contribution.
Well, thank you very much. That's beautiful recognition, and exactly what I'm hoping to do and hope to put out into the world. And I'm glad that it grabbed your attention, and actually brought us together, and we could have this discussion. That's really awesome.
It is, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it is. I really had a great time getting to know Linda a bit. We've actually talked about coaching together, and now this, and she's a really great person. I'll be sure to put a link to her book in the show notes, as well as her website. There's also a poem that she says made her cry, because it made her realize that she figuratively saved her own life by leaving the witnesses. Because it seems so accurately capture her journey, she didn't feel alone. So I'll have that poem up in the show notes as well. It's actually called The Journey. If you'd like to leave Linda a comment of support, feel free to do so at shunpodcast.com on the episodes page under her episode. I can't remember if I mentioned this lately or not, but the podcast is now available in more places. I've worked hard to get these stories into different places so more people could find them. So now the list of places you can listen includes the podcast apps like iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Podcast Republic, Podbean, Google Play Music, and most any podcast app. You can also subscribe and listen on YouTube at Shun Podcast. There's hundreds of people that listen that way. There's also a player on the website at shunpodcast.com where you can listen. And as of recently, you can also find the podcast on places like iHeartRadio, Spotify, Radio Public, Player.fm, Radio.com, and more. So it feels good to get this out where more people can find these stories and learn about the real lives of the people who probably live around them. And also, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, the same as Shun Podcast. I promised you a story from the Facebook group. So if you remember Jenny from episode 22, she's actually in the Shun Podcast group. And I'm just going to read her experience because it was awesome. One of the best things I've read in a while, and she agreed to let me share it. So, again, if this doesn't bring a smile to your face, nothing will. So here's what she says. So I heard through some gossip that a regular pioneer, one of my closest friends in the Borg, was disfellowshipped, which couldn't be true. I mean, I saw her Friday walking down Paris Street. At 5 p.m., busiest time of the day, I suddenly grew balls, stopped in the middle of the road, put my hazards on, and chased her down. I probably traumatized her as I basically ordered her into my car, LOL. I haven't seen her for 4 years. I started off by giving her my condolences. Her elder dad had died of cancer last year. She looks at me and says, Jenny, we both know my dad was an asshole. I said, well, I'm sorry for doing this. She said, doing what? I said, talking to you because I'm shunned. She said, Jenny, I left. I'm gay. I'm never going back. I'm living the best life now. Guess who's coming for coffee in an hour? Her. Update. 4-hour coffee visit. Supper date for Friday. Feeling elated. So, how awesome is that? I mean, what a cool experience to just find this person that was in your life that you were friends with. That now you just find her randomly walking down the street, kidnap her. I don't recommend that. and then find out that she's not just disfellowshipped. She's also mentally out, and she has no plans on going back. So, it just goes to show you never know. You never know who you might see one day. There's a balance there. You don't want to pine for people that sometimes can lead to some codependence. But at the same time, it never hurts to have hope that you might see these people one day, and you never know, who you might find walking down the road that you need to kidnap. So anyway, I just wanted to share that. I thought it was an awesome story. Everybody really liked it. You find things like that in the Facebook group. It's just called Shun Podcast. So before we end this episode, I'm going to make mention once again of what I decided to do for my birthday and how you can participate if you want. Never really found anything that got me excited about my birthday. So somebody in the group actually said something that sparked this idea. So what I'd love for my birthday is to hear from you. I've actually already got one card so far, and that's really awesome, but I'd love more. I'd love a birthday card, a photo of your family being out and being happy, a picture drawn by your kid, whatever you want to send me, just not Jehovah's Witness propaganda. I'd love getting, everybody, I don't know, maybe not everybody loves getting mail. I love getting mail, but I rarely get anything other than bills. So it'd be nice to have something kind of cool and special for my birthday. People, if you just send me a card or whatever, it would be pretty cool. And maybe I can do something with that. But anytime I get an email from somebody who has listened to the podcast, and whether it's in a different part of the world or just outside my own town, whatever the case is, it's just encouraging. It lets me know that this is getting out to people. It's helping people. I love hearing from people. I do this to help people. So if you'd like to participate in some way, the address will be in the show notes, but the address is P.O. Box 2641. Again, that's 2641, Clarksville, Indiana 47131. And again, I'll put it on the show notes. You can find them on the episode post at shunnedpodcast.com, along with the resources mentioned in this episode, how to donate if you choose to support the work I do. And again, if you have any interest in coaching, you can reach out there as well. I love doing this. I love all the people that listen. I love hearing from people who are former Jehovah's Witnesses or former Amish or Mennonite or any of these other religions, or just people who've never been in any of this, but who listen to gain greater understanding of the human experience or to understand someone in their life that's going through this. So connecting in these ways means a lot with all that I put into this. The theme song for the podcast is No Hell Yet by Fair Voyeur. And as we end all episodes, love others, do no harm, and go be happy.
We'll curse God